Let us cut the cost even further. How many employees do we need to fire to double our client company's profit? I know this is how many people think consulting works, but no. Real consulting is much more complex, my friends. I'm Jack and worked for 5 years at McKinsey & Company as a consultant and project manager, and now serve as an independent management advisor. On my Yun Consulting channel, I teach you my business and consulting insider knowledge. Actually, there are many ways to reduce cost, and there are even more options to increase profit. Let me recall the profit equation, which tells us in order to increase company profit, we can either reduce cost or increase revenue. And revenue can be decomposed into volumes times price. During my time at McKinsey, I worked on a number of projects and I managed to often get on the bright side of the profit equation. As a growth economist by background, I have often been working on developing growth strategies. While cutting costs can be very effective immediately in the short term, to win over the hearts of your clients, it is important that you also create a vision and a strategy on where and how to grow company revenue in the long term. In this video, I show you an analytical approach typically chosen by top consulting companies such as McKinsey, BCG or Bain to approach the question on how cooperation can grow further. This approach you can apply to a real-world consulting project or to consulting case studies related to revenue growth that you need to prepare for in order to get a job at a top management consulting firm. In this video, I will not only explain what type of analyses you need to carry out, but also how you would get to your results in practice. Let me share with you the task for this consulting project or case study. The CEO of a global equipment manufacturer hires the top strategy consulting firm McBainsey to identify options to further grow the revenue of its conveyor belt production division. Currently, the specific division serves a handful of customers in its home country. The CEO believes, though, that given their high efficiency, its conveyor belt products could be applied in high demand in many different industries. Furthermore, the CEO would like to choose the world region where it should start setting up a sales team. How would McBainsey identify the world region and industries that appear most promising to grow the client company's revenue? How do we approach such a problem? Well, typically you want to check both external as well as internal factors. The external factors relate to market attractiveness, the internal factors to the internal client capabilities. And on the market attractiveness side, you first want to ask the question, how large are the target markets you consider entering? And then also, are these going to develop dynamically? What about market growth? The market conditions bucket I will explain in more detail in a moment. On the client capability side, you want to ask the question, how well does the current client product portfolio fit the requirements of the target markets? And then ideally you also want to grow profitably in these new markets, and hopefully you also find an easy way to access customers there. Now let's look into the first bucket, market size. And first, what you see here is a matrix. That is what consultants love. On its top side, you find 3 world regions. Consultants at the highest level of aggregation love to split the world into 3 world regions. The Americas, that stands for North and South America. Then Asia Pacific, APEC, and EMEA stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And on the left side of the matrix, you find 10 industries. These industries maybe come from the client, or you have pre-aligned on these potential 10 candidates for exploration. And then to get the first estimate of potential market size, you typically start by getting market reports. These market reports give you a first indication of how large these markets are. Actually, these are bloody expensive. They often cost a 5-digit euro or dollar amount, and you're not always sure where these numbers come from. I mean, they claim that they survey different producers in these industries and then pool the numbers to give you an industry estimate. But truth to be told, you don't really know what how these black boxes were generated. So you always want to double check and validate these numbers with your internal or outside experts. And looking into these numbers, I mean, these are dummy numbers, of course, but you can see just if you take these for granted, that actually the Americas and the Asia Pacific markets seem to have some sizable industries. EMEA markets are a bit smaller on average. Let's move on to the second analysis, that's market growth, and that's a fun analysis, I like it a lot. So what you do here is you try to forecast expected annual growth rates in the target industries. And so here you see expected CAGR, that's the compound annual growth rate, so the average annual growth rate in the next 5 years. And you don't need to dig deeply here into the expected conveyor belt products growth. Rather, you look into the target industry and their final output goods. So like, let's see how many cars will be sold in Americas, APAC, EMEA. What about healthcare products in the target markets? Because if you estimate the expected growth rates of the final output goods, you then typically assume that the growth rates in the final output goods will carry over or will be strongly correlated with the pre-products such as conveyor belt products needed in these industries. And actually, just looking at the numbers here, you can see, and that's a very common picture, that growth rates in Americas and EMEA countries or regions are actually typically a bit lower just because these are more saturated or mature markets, and there are many developing countries in the Asia Pacific regions, which is where you typically find the higher market growth rates. Let us look into the market conditions. This actually is a qualitative analysis, in this example stretching across 3 dimensions. And I have abbreviated here the world regions by ABC, and then you find the industries. And you first want to check current price levels in these target markets, because if the prices vary a lot for the same products across these markets, that tells you that in some markets prices are low because there's probably price wars ongoing, and then it will be more difficult for you to make future profits in there. And this goes closely along with the intensity of competition. So if the competition is intense, that probably means that prices may reduce or decline more in the future. And then also you want to check barriers to further market entry that affects you. I mean, how difficult or easy it is for you to enter this market, that's important as well. And then actually you put it all together as a synthesis in this example, and you can see here there's many orange and yellow, or maybe also red, because typically, that's just the sad truth, you don't come first in most of these markets. How do you get to this data? Well, I mean, the client may have some insights for you, but in most cases you have to go outside and identify industry experts in the conveyor belt industry and who also have knowledge about these different target industries, and then you run many interviews with them. Let's bring this all together now. So on this slide you find market size, market growth, and the market conditions. And if we check this data set, then you can quickly see that the EMEA markets seem less interesting because they are across the board smaller and also not so dynamic in terms of growth. But there are a couple of juicy markets in the Americas and Asia Pacific regions that we probably want to say bookmark for later. And this concludes this initial set of analyses on the market attractiveness side. Let us now move on to the analysis of internal factors, the client capabilities, and I start with a product portfolio analysis. Here actually you go deep into the client products, and I've stuck here in this example, I've split the client products into 6 different components, A till F. And then for each of these product groups, you will sit down with the client and discuss how well do you think suit your product's applications in those target industries. And you really have to rely on the client here typically because they know their products best. And when you come out with such a mapping, that tells you how well you can serve these target markets from a technical perspective. We continue with another very exciting analysis, namely the client profitability analysis. And here we again start from the client product groups, and we now look into the profitabilities across these product groups. And these are indicated here by gross margins and just reflect the company's cost structures. So certain products just can be produced cheaper at lower costs than others. And then of course also price levels vary between the products in the company's home country. The art now really is to sit down with the client and analyze and predict what future product mixes do you expect to sell in the target industries, And to give you an example here, for instance, in forestry, you expect the largest profitability, and this is probably driven by a large share of product group C in the target product mix. And as a counterexample, in textiles, you expect that you will earn the lowest margins. This is probably driven by a large share of product F group products. And of course, this is just based on the current internal profitability levels. We already know there are external market forces there, so you may be forced to reduce your prices in the target markets. But of course, the higher your margins are currently, the more leeway you have to do so and to remain competitive in the markets you want to grow. Last but not least, we want to look into customer access. And the question here really is, how well do we believe that our client can acquire new customers in the potential target markets? And one way to consider this is to look beyond the conveyor belt division and actually consider all product divisions the client has, and then look into the market shares across all products. Here again, you would combine external market data with client revenues, and then you get in this example to these data, and you see that actually the company as a whole seems to have a large footprint in the EMEA markets. That's not really harmful probably, because remember, the most attractive markets are in Americas and Asia Pacific. And actually we do see that in Asia Pacific there are a few industry niches where we have some presence, and Americas we don't yet serve so well. And now let's bring it all together. And how do consultants typically do this? Yes, within a matrix. So I've drawn for you here this matrix that summarizes market attractiveness on the y-axis and client capabilities on the x-axis. And if I plot the three world regions, you find this picture. So in EMEA, we have a strong presence currently already in the other product divisions, but just the conveyor belt product markets don't seem that attractive in comparison. So let's wait and see. Americas has some more attractive markets in there in terms of industries, but just we have no presence there right now. And in summary, the Asia Pacific markets seem more interesting because there are a number of markets that have a large market size and also are expected to grow fast. Now we summarize the results from our analyses in the same fashion for the industries. And what we find here is that there are a couple of industries that are just not really interesting right now. And then there are chemicals and home appliances where we are currently good at serving internally probably, but just the markets are not so attractive in comparison. And conversely, in food processing and beverages, we find attractive markets, but just we have come to the conclusion that currently we can't serve them that well. So we probably want to prioritize healthcare and metals and mining as priority areas for growth. And we actually can tell another interesting story around these results to our client. So we recommend to first look in more detail into healthcare and metals and mining in Asia Pacific. And once we have entered these markets and have grown some further experience, we can then probably consider to either move into other industries in Asia Pacific, namely beverages and food processing, or actually consider staying in industries we already understand better by then and move into the respective Americas markets. So much on this case study for today. Let me know in the comments about any questions you may have. Of course, we have just scratched the surface here, but you should have a good idea now how revenue growth consulting case can be approached. Of course, further analysis can be done, for instance, on the client's general sales capabilities or on cross-selling opportunities to existing customers. So maybe we already sell products from another division to customers in the target markets, and we can try to increase our shares of wallets at these customers by now also offering them our conveyor belt products. And within the world regions, which countries do we want to target? We have also not yet talked about how to enter the new markets, either organically or by an acquisition. Further work and further consulting projects to be done. Well done, my friend! Showing me how to increase profit not just by cutting costs, but by increasing revenue. If you like this video, please give it a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon back here on Yuan Consulting.